Hello everybody and welcome to Handmade Hero, show where we code a complete game live on stream. We've got so much to do. There's all kinds of things we can do now. We're in party mode for Kronfaslauf, and we need to just go to town. So, you know, of the things that we can be doing, there's a lot of them. There's some quality of life things that I was doing yesterday, like now we can sort of have some hotkeys for our stuff here. Where we can switch between like debug output stuff we want to do. I'll probably do a little bit more of that in the future, but we don't really need it right now, so I'll let that be a little bit more on demand. We want to go do some asset system stuff. We want texture handle recycling, and I'd like to add better audio asset loading in there. And so when we go to add sounds, maybe I'll do that. I don't know I need to do it right now, but the texture handle recycling would be a problem. That we need to address at some point. And then finally, we need the ability to do the sort of the saving and loading of permanent alignment point stuff. So in terms of what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to start there. I'm going to start at the saving and loading of the alignment points because it's kind of been we keep pushing it back, like we're kind of been like we got to do that, we got to do that, we got to do that, and we just haven't done it. And I'd like to go ahead and do that because it's really important for us getting all the rest of our graphic stuff done. And you know, I want the cat. We showed how we can edit the cat before and do like create where the head should snap to the body and all this sort of stuff. So I'd like to be able to have that work. And so when we come in here and we do this editing like we did before, where I was saying like, oh yeah, let's make a place how. It snaps onto the head or whatever there, and we can adjust all this stuff now. Let's see there. Now that we can put this stuff together, we want to be able to save that kind of information, and right now we just don't have that, right? We have no. We have like no way to preserve this. So even though we did all the work to make all of this stuff, kind of like clean and efficient, right? We don't really have any way of actually saving what we did, and and there's also like little editor things like that's too thick. I can't see what's going on there. There's also like I'd like to add synthetic hits here for other parts of this thing. Because right now you have to have clicked on where the head is to edit the head, which is not as good. Like if I click anywhere on an entity, I should probably get all the things on that entity automatically, or at least have a little cycle so I can go through forwards and backwards and so on. But anyway, so now that we have the ability to edit that stuff, and I just want to be able to now go back here and hit the save button where I can, do all that work, and then when we come back into the game, it's the same as it was before. And there's two pieces to that. One's easy, one's hard. The easy one is we actually already have saving implemented into our data file format. So that's just calling a function. In fact, if you hit save and import, it would just save, I believe. So like if, for example, in here, if I hit import and save, I think that, because that will save the file. Well, you know what? I take that back. It may not, because nothing changed. Right? There was no actual there were no new bitmaps loaded, presumably. So it probably didn't actually save the file because none of them would have been marked dirty. But point being, if we had imported a new texture, it would have marked the file dirty, resaved it, and then this stuff would have saved. So then when we restarted, it would be there. I don't actually think it's going to be here now because I don't think it picked up any changes on the import because we didn't change any file. Yeah. But it would have. So implementing that part of the save feature would be simple. And in fact, I guess we can just go do that now. Because that part is just a question of saying which files we wanted to save in the first place. And that's it. So we can do that. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to have a permanent storage file format for those alignment points. And that's the text part of things that I wanted to do. And that's harder. It's not actually difficult to code. It's a bunch of parsing stuff. Like we just don't have any of that. And so putting that in there will take a little bit longer because it's just new code. It's not like we already have a bunch of stuff that does this or reads textile formats and so on. We do have some parsing stuff, so it's probably not as hard as it might be. in that sense, but you know, it's definitely something that that will take a little longer than this, which should probably be fairly straightforward. So if we go to the in-game editor, we look at the save function here, where we've got like should save, you know, and then it says like, okay, let's save the file. Check for art changes here. You know, this part where we say we're going to save. The problem that we're going to get is we need to be able to mark things as dirty and have the... I don't actually know that we really want this to happen per se, right? Like, we probably need something more like this. You know, something like this, or do, you know, do save preparation or something like that, where, you know, we're going to do something like this, and we're also going to mark the files as dirty, right? So in here, we'll mark all the files as dirty that need to get marked dirty. And then what we would have is, instead of saying should save, what I want to do instead is say like, you know, I want to say do save preparation or like prepare for save or whatever. I want to do prepare for saving, and prepare for saving will do whatever needs to happen, and then this will execute the save in and of itself, right? I think that's probably what we want to do. In fact, I think what we could do actually is save all changes. Now I think about it, we could do it this way. Like so. I think we could actually do this. And then what we would do is inside the asset system, where we do check for art changes, this would not happen here anymore, right? So what we would actually do is have this rewrite or write all HHA modifications. So in here, right, this is what we would call on the game assets, and the temp arena in this case, where we, you know, we're using the one from up here. Yeah, I think we just want to do. Yeah, well, it already was doing that. So yeah, like, this is more what we want, because then we can just say, okay, you know, when you want to do your saving, right, check for art changes would not really be check for art changes. It's just like import changed assets, right? And we would call that and then save all changes. Whereas if you hit save, we'd just do save all changes. You know what I mean? So I think that's more what we would want to do. And save all changes would do this. And in here, when we go to do the save all changes, we now just have to do the stuff that we were going to do, where we need to take a look at any changed assets and make sure that they get saved out, you know, in a more meticulous fashion, right? So there's two ways we can do this. One is we can, well, you know what, I guess I would say we really kind of want to, we probably want to do this in a way that is actually fairly specific. So we probably just want to loop over all of the changes that we've done. So the undo stack back to the last clean undo sentinel. So, you know, when we do a revert, for example, like this code here. So this is effectively what we want to do, but we don't want to actually undo the changes. So really what we'd want to do here is say, look, we've got this change list here for the in-game edits. So we want to look at like each of those. We want to start at whatever the clean undo sentinel was. And we would just want to go to there. I mean, we could do it this way. So if we look, the undo stack, like the first thing you would undo is the next pointer on the undo sentinel stack, right? We would want to loop until we got to wherever it was that, was considered no more edits, right? Because we keep that watermark of like when the last time you saved was. And then we've got sort of the edit here, right? Where we loop to the next. I want to say there's a condition here that we need to take into account, which is that we may have done a redo operation that redoes past the clean undo sentinel. And I'm not really sure what we would do in that case. Because we would have to redo... at one point someone asked me, like, why have two stacks? And I was like, I don't know, why not have two stacks? It seems a little clearer. But when I'm thinking about that, I'm like, maybe it's true that we should have had just one stack. Because you can see where there's a bug here. I think it already exists in the revert. Because let's say that the clean undo sentinel next is now pointing to something that's in the redo stack. This just wouldn't terminate. It would just crash, right? When it gets, it wouldn't crash. It would assert, right? Which is the same as crashing. So it makes me think that maybe we do want that to happen as an undo redo. And I guess what you would need at that point, but now I think about it, it doesn't really solve the bug because you still need to know whether that's in front of or behind you. So yeah, so I guess the way I would look at it is say, all right, so the clean undo sentinel next, this is not really sufficient, right? We need to know where that was. So we'd have to do this, where we have this notion of a clean edit, right? And then what we'd have to do is say, well, whatever the changes that we've made since the clean edit is what we have to mark. Now, if you want to revert, then you have to look to see whether the clean edit's in the undo sentinel or the redo sentinel, and you have to undo or redo whichever one it is until then. If you want to save all your changes, then you would need to do the same thing, right? You need to figure out which stack you're in, and you need to walk that stack until you get there. So I think what we'd want to do here is say, look, find this thing. And maybe we say something like in-game edit find find clean edit list. Right? And in here we would say, you know, if the in-game edit existed or not. And this would just take one of these. So if you asked us to match that pointer, we would say, okay, you know, here's our test. As long as the test is not equal to the sentinel, we'll look. If we find one of these, we'll say, okay, here's our result. So in here we just say, look, if the test equals the match, then go. So we look here, we say, look through this list. If you find the thing, you found it. If not, you didn't, right? And so here we can say, if the edit that we're talking about, which is the clean edit, if the edit exists in the undo sentinel, then it is the undo sentinel list that we're talking about. Oops. So result equals editor undo sentinel. Else, if the edit exists, you know, I guess in this case we could say result equals editor redo sentinel and assert that the edit exists in there. Because it's an error to ever be in a case where somehow it didn't exist in either of them, right? So I'm going to do one other thing here because I need to, I need this to make sure that if the list is empty or the match was equal to the sentinel, that we return right away. And so what I'm going to do here, I might do this. I might say that. So now what I can do is say if the sentinel equals the match. You know what I'm saying? Because we do, at startup, have clean edit just point to the sentinel. Right? It's just nothing. So if it happens to equal the sentinel, that needs to still return true. So we need to basically do this, and then I think we're good, right? So what we can do now is implement these more properly. We can say when we go to save all the changes that we're going to save, what we could do is see which one of these we need. So we can say the in-game edit list in question equals find clean edit list, and there's the editor. And then we can just loop through that list and know that, well, we don't know which list it was in, but we also don't care, right? We know that we have to go through everything up until that point. So we know that we just need to take whatever list we're given and go from there. Right, oops. I don't know why I changed that to list for no reason. So when we're doing this, then here's the part where we would mark this asset for writing, etc. And then at the end of this, we would mark the clean edit as being at the end of the undo sentinel or the redo sentinel or whomever, right? Because we are saving all the changes, so now it's fine. So that seems like it doesn't matter whether we use the undo or the redo one in this case, I don't think. I have to think about that. I wonder, we may need to include an actual link. So I'm not really sure. We'll have to test that. I'm not sure whether we need to put something in there or not. My gut instinct says we don't, because as long as we specify what this was supposed to be, there's only two cases. Either it actually was something, in which case that something is now being tracked as the state that had to be valid. If it was nothing, then there isn't anything on the undo list anyway, and so once you are in that position, you should be good to go, right? Because you can't hit redo anyway. So I think that's okay. So really the only thing we need to modify then after that is just the revert function. Like I said, it's not really correct anymore. So this needs to do one of two things. Like what we really need to do on revert is we need to say, hey, tell us which one of these two it is, right? And, you know, I could actually do this myself because, you know, since I need to do two different loops, it doesn't really matter, I guess. But, you know, in this case, sorry, I got that backwards there. If it happens to be in the undo stack, then I just keep undoing until I'm done. And if it happens to be in the other stack, right? So, you know, that's the same path as before. If the clean edit was actually in the other stack, though, then what we would need to do, and let me also do that assertion. I didn't mean to delete that because we might as well continue with that. If it happens to be in the other stack, then what I would need to do is do redos, right? Now, this is the same, you know, meaning I'm still waiting for this to be the case, if that makes sense. But I would keep doing redos to get to that point, because I'm actually, instead of undoing, I need to do redos to get there, if that makes sense. And so that case happens when I save the game, or save the state, so I mark something, and then rather than the user making edits, they actually hit undo a couple times. And now, if they want to revert, it means reverting is actually redoes changes. It doesn't undo changes, it redoes them to get back to the state of the file. You know what I mean? So I think that's correct. Again, we may be going a little bit further than we need to here because this is just an in-game editor for our own use, and getting all this stuff right is probably not super necessary. But, you know, it is an educational stream after all. So there we go. Don't know if there's any other things that you get. Yeah. So when we actually do this loop now, and we look through the list to find whichever list has the clean edit in it, we look through to see where that is. We need to go for each edit and figure out how to mark that edit as something that needs to get rewritten, right? That needs to get written back. And so in the actual file, the asset manager, right? Inside here, we kind of have these, we have a notion of where the thing came from that we store, like the file index and the asset index and file. So for each one of the assets that we know we touched in the edit, we can go to the asset file and mark it as modified, so that we know that it needs to get written back at that point. Allow editing is an interesting thing. I don't know if maybe we should be looking at that allow editing flag to see earlier on in the process to prevent you, for example, from selecting things you couldn't edit, or prevent you from selecting things. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What we probably would have to do in the future if we wanted to be super good about it is if you tried to edit something that was in a file that doesn't allow editing, we would create a new file for you, and then the edits would go in there, right? So it also means we could change the way that we are doing, like we could make that local.hha, we could make that be a thing too. So we'll see. We'll see how we want to do that in the future. For now, however, all we really needed to worry about is setting that modified flag to be true anytime we've done an edit in an asset that's in one of those files. And that part's pretty easy because it doesn't actually matter like how many times we set that flag. So basically what we'd be doing here is saying, well, file modified equals true. So all we really need to do is get whatever the asset was for this change, right? Something like this. And in here, we would just say, well, assuming this change related to an asset of some kind, then we need to get the file for the asset, which we kind of know is it's something we could just look up directly in here, right? Because we know that the list of asset files is maintained by the system. I don't actually know asset source file. I'll be honest, I don't really know to what extent we need this anymore, but all right, doesn't matter. So anyway, all we're going to do here is set that modified equal to true, and so all we have to do is get the file, for that asset, right? And in here, when we, for this particular asset, when we get that that file back, we just set it modified to true. So the thing that we don't really have at the moment, like I was saying, is the other side of this, which is that if an asset gets modified, in here we kind of want to specify that it needs to get rewritten, that its specific data needs to get rewritten. And so that part is a little bit harder. Like, I don't know exactly how we would... do that cleanly. There's two ways we could. One's probably a little more work than it's worth because, C++ and its terribleness. But really all we want to do here is just create a little local hash table and use it. But of course that would bring us into template nightmare land if we were going to have stuff that was able to do that. Where we just want to mark, like, okay, which assets do we actually need to save the file and which ones we don't. And so, I don't love the idea in here of having it so that we have to rewrite that. But, the other thing we could do is just rewrite all the text files every time when we save. Or just diff the contents, of those text files. So... I think I may just leave it at that. And we'll go from there. So in here we do get asset for edit, and we go look up in one of these files here. Let's see. So set active asset. internalize. Let's see. No, none of that matters. So right here, it's basically this stuff. So what I want to do is have something that, for one of these types, which again, we don't really know what it does because they can be any kind of edit in here. Then what we want to do is something like this, where we say, okay, for each asset, or rather for this edit, look at what type it is, and if we know what kind of edit it actually is, then we can get the asset back pretty easily. We can say get asset and do it this way. Something like this. And then later, if we have other types that can also report one of those, we can have a way of getting them in here as necessary. You know what I mean? So once we have that, then we really just need something that allows us to get the file. And I don't actually know that we've ever done that. We can get a file from a file index, but not necessarily from an asset. So, but that's probably fine. I mean, we could just say get file and leave it at that, right? So get file, we pass the editor assets and the file index for that asset, and that may be sufficient, right? That is not what I meant to type. And neither is that. What else we got? All right. So in terms of the matching there, I'm going to go ahead and switch this build to debug mode and just step through there because I want to see what that actually does. Because we added some stuff there, and I know what I wanted it to do, but who knows if I made a typo in there somewhere, and just want to make sure that it's actually going to do what I wanted it to do and not some other thing that is unrelated to those. So let's suppose I come out here and I want to edit the little cat head again. In here I just can select the cat, right? So as you can see, it's in its default state, doesn't have anything special here. So I'm gonna edit it a little bit. I'm gonna place it on the ground in a more specific fashion. I'm gonna set the base of neck. I'm gonna move the base of neck up to roughly where the base of neck should be. And then I'm gonna select the head again, or whatever that's called, this piece, right? And then I'm going to adjust that so that that piece does roughly what I expect as well. I don't know exactly how I want that. So now I've got two assets that should have been edited there. And I want to set a breakpoint so I can watch what the in-game editor does when I say that I wanted to save it. So let's see. I think that was called save all changes, right? And now if I go to the HHA and I hit save, I want to see what it does. So first it's going to look to see where this thing is, and it correctly located it here. Hopefully correctly located it here, which is exactly where it should have located it. So hopefully that is what happened. Then we can say, all right, for any given edit, like I should have, if I look in here now, for any given edit, I should have a thing where I see what it actually changed. And you can see here it said okay, asset 307 edited its 0 align point, right? And so, what's it actually going to do? I want to get the file back. That should be local.hha, I think. Should be the file in question. Of course, I don't actually know if it is or isn't. I should probably bake some naming stuff into the header of the file so that you can actually see after you've loaded it what it actually is. Because I don't think the platform stores the file name. Maybe it does. I don't know. I don't think it does, though. Does it? Well, yeah, let's see. No, it definitely doesn't. I mean, you can even see that it's not a pointer, right? It's like a kernel handle. or something. So in here, I'm going to say that this file is now modified, so it's going to set that to true. And of course, I'm assuming it did set it to true, even though Visual Studio so helpfully prevents us from being able to see anything after we step out of a scope. I do not know whose idea that was, but that person, if they didn't already quit and go work somewhere else, is fired. So, here's us setting all those modified flags, presumably all in the same file because these all come from the local HHA. We then set so that we assume that the edit we assume that the edit's clean now. Now we're going to go through here, and there should be the local HHA should actually be marked as modified. So when we get there, which is here, we should write all of them out again, and that should be it. So now, in theory, that data was saved to the HHA, and so if we load the game again, we should get back to a situation where those edits are preserved, again, only in the HHA. And we can see that that actually is true, right? So that's really all we need to do to save the stuff. And if you didn't mind realigning everything in the game every time you wanted to build the HHAs, you could just do that, right? That could be the end of it. But like I said, I'm not sure we want to use that as our as our permanent file format. That seems ill-advised. You know what else we should do? We should while we're on the subject, in entity gen, the cat head in here, I'm not sure why we're getting. If you look at what's happening here, I don't really know why we're getting these happening in the same place. I don't understand why why they're Z fighting exactly. Because if you look at the entity visible piece body and entity visible piece head stuff, it looks like it looks like maybe it's ignoring the offset or something. And so I wonder if we maybe have that code wrong a little bit. Because sort of, these are offsets relative to where they should be just placement-wise, right? So in a sense, they should just both be set to this. You know what I mean? That's the initial settings. And if we go look at what actually happens when you create one of these, you know what I mean? And we go over here and look at where that actually places things. Then presumably, it's kind of stuck in the ground, right? You can see it stuck down in there, right? But what I'm not sure about is why. Because in theory, if the alignment point is on the bottom of the cat, the point that it's standing on should be up here somewhere. And so it should be starting out I worry that we've got a bug in the entity placement code. And we haven't really streamlined that code yet. We only just kind of put in the basics of it yet. And so I am a little bit concerned. And if you look at a lot of this stuff, there's just a lot of nonsense going on in here. And we haven't looked at it in a while. And we probably needed to get a little more serious about it, because especially if we're going to start saving data out where we're doing actual work to position art assets, we don't want all of that positioning to be based on a mistake. You know what I mean? So when we do stuff like the alignment here and we set the initial P, you can see this stuff you can already see that it's wrong in a lot of ways. The initial P, this piece offset actually has to be added afterwards because it's supposed to be the offset from the location that you would snap to, right? Because the piece offset is a separate offset. So, that is really what should be happening there, because that's what would allow this to say, wherever this thing snaps to, here's how much I want to offset it, which we want to be able to do for things like Z and stuff to offset the position. That, we want to be able to do. So, so that's that. And looking at the entity ground P part of things, I guess I don't know how that's actually being set, and I would like to know where that is, so we may want to look at that a little more carefully. To make sure it's actually on the ground. But the offset parameter is the only thing I was worried about here. Like, where are we getting that from? So when we say offset, what do we mean? And it looks like we're talking about, you know, mostly animation there. So that's fine. So that really shouldn't be anything at the moment. So it's really just the entity ground P. So assuming that that's the case, what is happening here? We've got the P sprites plus, so we're using that, whatever that parent is, and the get P percent for the parent's alignment. That all seems fine. And then we're changing that height ratio there. So that all looks fine. And when we go to get the parameters and we use the initial P, that should be the point that that it aligns around, right? So let me just make sure. Here's sprite values for upright. So inside here where we specify the alignment of this thing, we do subtract backwards based on the alignment X and alignment Y. So if the alignment is at the base of that thing, then I mean that should do it, right? Like, so I feel like the only thing I'm not sure about is what happens with the min P. That all makes good sense. And the sprite scaled x-axis stuff, let me just double check. Then we can go see if there's anything else weird going on there. But in here, I just want to make sure this is kosher. Yeah, so that all looks fine. So we start at that base P and then we push around from there. So yeah, I'm not sure why that's stuck in the ground, and I want to get at the bottom of that first. So I'm going to draw some of these things because that's not good, right? That's not a good thing. What's happening there? So the fact that seems like this point here, and in fact, you know, if I look in the editor here, let me pick this cat. If I look in the editor here at where the points have to be, that's way too thick. That stuff needs to be based on like the screen space size or something. Can I get that thinner? All right, that may be a little too thin. Oh no, it wasn't too thin. I just didn't have it selected. There we go. So looking at that, I mean, you can even see just like if we look at the alignment points, you can see that its two parent alignment point is that red block, right? So if that red block is where the thing was standing, why isn't it, you know, why isn't it up on this thing? You know? I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like it's not actually placing that entity on anything, which may be true, like for all I know. Like it may be that we didn't actually place this entity on anything. like when we do one of these place entity calls, like that part is a little bit squinky in that, you know, the standing on thing, I don't know, is it set to anything? I assume it is. But again, I don't really know what happens in that case. Like, it's been a while since we did anything with that. And so when we do a world position P for placement, I don't know if like the standing on thing properly overrides that or what happens there, right? So I feel like that is a little bit busted, probably. And, you know, we should double check to make sure that's all flowing properly. And, you know, because that's a part of the code that we haven't really gotten to yet. Like, that's a part of the code we haven't really pushed on much. So where am I genning my cat here? You can see here we create the pending entity here, and the reference to the traversable is here. You know, and looking at this, I guess I would say I can't quite tell, but that does look wrong. If that's the, like, here we've created an entity for the floor, right? And we've said that the traversable on it is at 0, 0, 0. But when we push a piece on there, and, you know, we can look at like this stuff. When we push a piece on there, all this stuff comes into play, and like, who knows, you know, is the 0, 0 actually there or not? Like, we've got all this nonsense going on here. And these offsets and all this other stuff. So, you know, we got to make sure that this stuff actually is accurately placed where it should be placed. If the asset's location, so in this case, like we have a dimension here that's 0.5 times the wall height, and we offset it by negative 0.5 times the wall height. So if we assume that's a radius, then this is trying to displace it downward so that 0, 0, 0 is the correct location to stand on. So yeah. I'm going to go ahead and draw whatever those traversable points are first. I think that's the easiest thing to do. Because like I said, I'm a little weirded out right now, and I don't really want to move forwards until I have a good understanding of what's happening there. So we've got a little thing for drawing the traversables here. Let's re-enable that a little bit. Don't really know what this is for. It looks like we were drawing some kind of a rectangle for no real reason. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually say let's draw a cube on it. So we know that we've got the entity ground point here, I guess, and at least I think this would give us the position that we should be looking at there in terms of the traversable. So if I wanted to draw a cube that would show me where that was, you know, I can use essentially this code for drawing a cube. Excuse me. And so if I wanted to put one of these on there at this location, and then define some kind of a point there, you know, maybe it looks like this. I'm going to use a known color here, maybe magenta. And then I'm going to render that, those traversables. Um, so, you know, they're definitely in the right place. So something is busted about the way we're placing the cat on there, and that's what I'd like to address. Because before I'm not going to go any further till I have that exact, right? So those all look like they're in exactly where we think they should be. And so I want to know why the cat isn't getting placed onto that traversable properly. Now, one reason could be if that's not what actually happens, meaning we didn't actually do any code. Like maybe we didn't actually do anything that tries to snap people to traversables. Meaning if someone's standing on something, maybe that's not how that works. I don't know. So I'm going to look real quick just to see what happens when you add a hero. And I'm going to see what happens there. So let's see where that is. So in here, it looks like you actually have to do... It looks like you actually have to do this call for the cat. So I don't know. I think we're gonna, you know, like this is code that we want to go do eventually, like later on anyway. So I guess I won't worry about it too much for now. But you can see, like, this is just a little bit much at this point. So I guess if we just say that. Yeah, I guess if we just say that, that's good enough for now. But really, we want to get that stuff a little more automated. This is just too much busy work to be doing here, and we don't need to do it because it's going to do this again later anyway. So why this would be happening up front, I have no idea. Because entities should just be placed in regular sim space to begin with, because that's what we're actually operating in at the moment. So I don't know what's going on there. This is just garbage. So that seems stupid. I don't remember what the region is called here. Just regular region, I guess. But that's dumb. And, you know, before we get too hot and heavy in that code, which will be more gameplay side of things, we should just clean that up because there's no need for that. That's just silly. So let's see what's going on here. Of course, that does not appear to have helped. It definitely moved our cat to a different place, right? But it does not seem to have actually fixed the part I was interested in. So again, still not really helpful here. I also, where is the... Get entity ground point. So we also don't really have... You can see there's just a lot of vestigial remain stuff here, and we don't so we don't even have the notion of an entity ground point anymore. And for obvious reasons, because pieces can have offsets to them already, so this stuff is just irrelevant, right? So, you know, this is not something we would ever need to actually have, because entities would always be related to wherever they were, and the ground point part of things is not really a thing. Like, I feel like this is just not really a thing. So I'd be interested to know who's actually using that and why. And the answer is absolutely no one. So what we want to find out is, why is this position not being in, like, placing the cat squarely on the ground? Like, what is the what's the issue there? Because we should see the red point of the cat snap directly to the purple point of the ground, because that's the initial placement, in theory, of what it should be. So the other thing I want to do here is just figure out, is something else stupid happening? So in here where we highlight somebody, I'm going to also, in addition to highlighting, you know, the various other aspects of this entity, I want to just, you know, show where's the entity position, you know, like where's that at? Show me like a white marker or something at that location, so I can figure out what the heck happened in terms of its placement. Because at the moment, anyway, I don't really know, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. At the moment, I don't really know whether or not the entity's position value is wrong, or whether the entity's transform stuff is wrong. And so I want to eliminate, I want to get down to figuring out which one is the culprit before I start trying to debug anything. So looking at the cat from the underside here, if I select it, you can see the white point there. So it's the entity's actual position that's wrong, because the white point is properly pegged. So for whatever reason, even though we were trying to set it so that it would be there, it's actually not there, and we don't know why. So we now have a concrete reason why, who's to blame, right? And so we want to go figure out what's displacing the entity's position in that fashion. And so that, in theory anyway, is like the get sim space traversable thing we're calling here. Oh, haha. So I think I know why that would be the case. So if you look at what happens here in the room gen, so if we're going to call this function, you'll notice we don't place this entity until here, right? And so really, we probably need to wait to do this somewhere else. So we kind of want to do something more like this, I guess. Because if we have to place this entity before we can place an entity onto it, right? So we kind of want to do this, and we want to do this only if the traversable count is 1, I guess. So now we'll have actually placed the floor tile prior to calling the placement of the entity onto the floor tile. And lo and behold, now we're actually doing the thing correctly, right? And so now if I actually look at this cat here, you can see that it's welded properly to the floor the way that I would expect. Unfortunately, as with like one of the reasons we need a proper debug camera here is I can't really focus on that as well as I would like. You know, I'd like to be able to zoom in on just that thing. And so that's why we really need a debug camera at some point here, a real one, because otherwise we'll never be able to edit this stuff properly. But that looks about right. And so if I look at the alignment points here now and we, oops, that's the head. in theory, like, if you were to place it so that it's square on there, it would look exactly as it should. Yeah, like it lines up exactly as it should. And so, yeah, just like this is exactly what I would have expected to have happen, and it looks correct. And now you can also see, this is the thing I was talking about before about how we need some idea of how we want to bias the z values, because if you're sitting on the center, you actually have a part of your sprite that will naturally dip below. And so we need to, the problem is the sprite encodes stuff that technically comes out this way in negative y, and the renderer doesn't know that. So it just thinks it's a plate that's extending down into the ground. And so that's the part, not being able to see the bottom of that cat, is the part there that I was talking about. And that's about biasing those z values so that we don't have that issue. But otherwise, now that's all correct. And now we can also do what I wanted to do before with like offsetting these sprites. So now, So now when we create these entities, we should be able to use the piece offsets themselves to make the sprites be offset in z, in various ways that would allow them to sort of shift location a little bit more too. In terms of how that wants to happen, the only thing that's a little confusing is I almost feel like you want these piece offsets in this case to be relative to some coordinate system on the actual sprite. So z would actually come off this way, and x and y would be the other way. As opposed to it being interpreted in world space, which seems less useful. So for example, if I say that the head is displaced that way, I feel like you really want that to mean in the plane of the sprite, not in the world. So I'm not sure I'm explaining this well, but like you can kind of see how that displaced the sprite. I'm not sure to what extent that actually makes sense. Maybe it's fine. We'll have to see. So I feel like that's something we got to think about a little bit more too. Hard to say. But the good news is like all that stuff just kind of works, so that's fine. Where's the other cat? There's the other cat. So that would be about how that would look. I'm not sure where that piece should be. Probably like there, maybe? Guessing? Ish? So yeah. I think that's about right. In terms of placing the cat. I don't know how big cats should be. That's sort of another question. feel like that's sort of right. Maybe. Ghost cats are obviously harder because we don't really have a real ghost effect at the moment anyway. But, you know, you can see that it's translucent. Hannah's translucent at the moment because she is a ghost cat. So I guess that's all fine. And, yeah. I guess that's all fine and dandy. So yeah, so for now, like that would just work, like I was saying before. We don't really have any issues with saving stuff and reloading it. Like if I saved and reloaded here, we would get back to presumably all of those cats would be aligned the same way that they were. You can see there we got that going. Where the other cats are here. Right. Like so. And so I think that is all we need for if we just wanted the HHAs. So the only other thing we would need is for permanent archival storage. And for now, I'm just going to say, like, maybe we ignore that. Maybe we put that off. I don't know, we could. We could definitely put it off until such time as we wanted to actually rebuild HHAs or something. And then we could try doing that where we, you know, have a thing which dumps all of the things out to text from an HHA and something like this. So I don't really know, right? It's hard to say. I'm not sure how I feel about it one way or the other. So I think what I'd rather do, honestly, yeah, I'd rather just kind of go forward with other more pressing concerns. Because, like, again, like having the HHA there is now fine with me. I don't know, like. Yeah, I don't know. What I will say is we should probably start keeping track of all the stuff that we should have to do, and maybe we can use, I don't know, we can use the GitHub for that or something. Unfortunately, the GitHub has gotten a little bit onerous lately because, you know, I don't really have a way of signing onto it very easily, I don't think. I don't know if I did it here. Oh, I guess we did. So if we... no, how do I get to... oh, okay, I see. Yeah, right. Like if I sign in here, I can't actually do it because I need to do two-factor authentication to actually log in, right? So I was going to say we could start trying to keep a to-do list on there because that way we can actually, everyone can see it who's on the private GitHub. But I'll try logging in later after the stream. I'll grab my phone and maybe try to keep myself logged in so we can use it. So yeah, looking at the situation here, I guess what I would say is there's just a lot of things we could be working on, and I'm not sure which ones I actually want to do. I kind of want to just start playing around with it. We've got so much stuff though that's like on the to-do list now. Like everything could be on the to-do list, right? So I don't know what I want to do exactly. Who knows? What I do think maybe I'll do at the moment. So I'm just looking at like this stuff, and I'm thinking about the fact that ideally we want, you know, there always to be stuff. We don't really want a scene where there's just nothing there. You know, on the, you know, having like nothing on the outside seems bad. And so, there should always be like tiles out here probably to like, that fill out further. I'd like to do something like that. I want to make the camera work properly. The camera doesn't seem to be right at the moment. Like you see that weird discontinuity when it goes between centering on rooms. That's what's very strange. I'm not sure what's happening there. The projection code is also wrong. Did you notice that? So like, first we have some kind of bug in our scene projection that's like not actually correctly projecting where the lighting bound should be. You know what I mean? So that was pretty weird too. So we just have so many things that I'm looking at now. I'm kind of overwhelmed by all the stuff that I could do, and I'm not sure which of it I should do first. Just really hard to say. So let's see what else we have for stuff. So inside Handmade art, what did we actually put in? Like we got grass, stone, floor, we got the walls, we got the cats. We put the cats in there. We've got Krampus, and Krampus isn't in there yet. We also have some monsters that we haven't put in yet. We've got ground cover, we've got the hand, we've got hats. Here's some trees and stuff. Of course, don't ask me why Windows can't show this alpha-wise. Got title screen. Yeah, so mostly, yeah, I mean, like, one thing we haven't really talked about is how to scatter stuff around. So, like, okay, so it loaded it with alpha this time. Apparently, I have no idea why. So if we look at something like these forest obstacles, right? I do think, these are some things we wanted. Like, one of the reasons we had these is we were sort of thinking about how are they going to look. I think these are probably at a fairly reasonable, like a fairly reasonable architecture. But I do wonder, like, if these were 3 different tufts of the tree, it would probably work better because then as they slid relative to each other, they would probably look a little bit better. I'm just guessing. Because they wouldn't be... Yeah, I don't really know if that's true, but, like, I do think, like, maybe, like, the tufts at the top and these should be, like, separated out. That's hard to say. But, looking at furniture, like the lamps and stuff here and these things, we could try and get these in there. And I don't, again, really know, like... One of the ideas here was for us to start thinking about how these things should be labeled and brought in. And so, looking at these, I'm like, well, how would we label these things? There's like a throw rug. There's like tables. And they just don't really have any association with each other. They're just things that happen to be in the orphanage. So I feel like they probably want to be broken into like separate files to a certain extent there, where like, you would probably have each file and then you would just text name it what it was actually going to be. Yeah, I really don't know. I wonder what it is that makes it so it shows alpha or not. Like, why does it show alpha sometimes on the forest obstacles and sometimes it doesn't? Like, did you notice it's got it now, right? The alpha composited this time, right? So why? What is it? What's the magic? Like this time it didn't. I just, it's kind of magic. Like it's like how it's almost a game to figure out how Microsoft wrote that code. Like, how do they make it so that sometimes the alpha composite works, sometimes it doesn't? Like, what did they do? And if you zoom in far enough, it does. It comes back. You know? So yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what we should be doing right now. So let's think about this. So we want to get our characters in there so we can get like the hopping and stuff working too, and like because right now we were sort of worrying about how we're going to tag that. And the camera stuff, can we get outside yet? So we should make it so that the outside generates an outside, right? I mean, that seems like something reasonable to be doing. So in here, like we have like stone floor and stuff like that. And so, you know, maybe we should also make a thing that's like, is there, you know, like the on boundary thing? It's like, you know, if outdoors, then on boundary equals false kind of a thing. So basically, like, there's some kind of room spec thing, and like the room spec just says if it's outdoors. And again, this is not real code. This is totally fake. I'm just hacking these things in there. This stuff will get developed quite a bit more when we actually want to push on it hard. But I'm kind of just putting in the things that we might, you know, showing some things we might want to do so that we can get educated about how we want that code to look. So we can look at if the spec outdoors, then we don't have walls. And if it is outdoors, then, you know, we would need to not set this stuff, right? So we would say tag floor and stone floor or whatever. We would need to set the grass stuff up. So like that. So we need to do like, okay, if outdoors, we have a different kind than, you know, this is going to be like tag grass or something. And that way we can say that something's outdoors and it will get generated as outdoors. Of course, you know, it's not really doing much, but at least we can sort of see what that would look like. And so then in here, when we look at like the forest path and stuff like that, when we create those, we can just say that those were supposed to be outdoors, and then, you know, it will get generated that way. So in here we've got like, you know, the garden and the forest spec, I think, are the two. And so I don't remember when we were sort of mucking with that, but I guess just here. So if we look at those two, maybe I drop them here, like the garden spec outdoors equals true, and the basic forest spec outdoors equals true. And then those will be like set to be outdoors areas, which just, you know, is really basic at the moment. But so I think, wasn't there like a backyard path over here or something? Yeah, so like this is outside, this is like the garden area, right? I should also probably turn off those attachment points for the moment because we don't really need to be seeing those. Should probably put this on a debug thing as well so we can turn it on and off. Oops. Sorry about that. So yeah, like, you know, those don't have walls around them, which is fine. We should probably put like trees in there or something, or who knows what. And then yeah, like out there, there's also, you know, this part's forest path as well. So that's all fine. That all seems reasonable. So I want to say what I maybe want to focus on now is just like, let's improve that camera code a little bit, and because I don't really want to go work on, yeah, there's enough things to work on here that I'm not sure which one would be the best, but the camera is constantly annoying me, and so being able to work with that a little bit better would probably be a big improvement, because right now, like, I totally can't do anything with that. And also we've got that lighting projection problem, so you can see that, like, even though I can see around these other areas, it's not actually properly picking where the lighting should be occurring, right? So, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but, you know, a lot of them have to do with the fact that I think that code was not taking into account the perspective and the angle very well. And so, and I don't know exactly how we really want to do that going forwards. So, yeah, and you know, if you look at the area that we're simulating, right, is much larger. It would be nice if our lighting was more about what was visible, and, you know, we may be able to kind of move more towards stuff like that as we improve how the lighting actually works. But at the moment anyway, we only have like rudimentary quality on the lighting, which is unfortunate. But anyway, and you know, like you said, you can see why I'm reticent to give it up though, because you get nice results from it, right? Like, even just looking down there, this is just a much more interesting looking space with our crappy lighting than over here, which is what it would look like with no lighting. Like, you don't want to really explore that. You do kind of want to explore that. And so that redoubles my assumptions that we really want the lighting to be good. And we probably want to spend some time on it, continuing to spend time on it, getting it good. Because that is what we want almost. It's a speed issue. It's really just speed. I mean, what we have right now is actually quite good lighting in a sense. But the speed is horrible, and so we need to, yeah, make that not be horrible. So moving on from here, I think, yeah, maybe just looking at the camera. I don't know how much time I have, but maybe we can start opening up the camera. I could also do recycling texture handles. Those are the two things that come to mind. How much time do we have left? How much time do we have left? How do I know? How long has the stream been live? 1 hour and 56 minutes, so probably so we probably have about 20 minutes to go. 25 minutes to go. Did we start at like 1:15 maybe? So I think we've got like, I think we've maybe got 25 minutes to go, I'm gonna say. So what I want to do with the camera, there's a lot of kind of crappy stuff that's happening with the camera at the moment, and I would like the camera to not be crappy. And so I think what we want to do is like force the camera to be good, and do actually the right thing in you know, in terms of how it's represented coordinate system wise and so on. Do we need any of this stuff? We don't need it. This has been long forgotten code. So, you know, the way that this stuff works, right? We've got all this stuff. You know, here's update camera for entity movement, right? And we say like, hey, here's the camera that we're looking at, and here's the sim region, and we've got like what entity the camera's supposed to be following, you know. And that's not bad. Like that seems totally reasonable as a call. So that seems fine. I don't care about the debug light P, by the way. Yeah, I don't know that we care about that very much, but can we still do this, by the way? Does this mean we can carry a light around with us? Maybe I do care about it because I would like it to keep happening. So in here we've got the group, the debug IP, the radius, the color, the emission, and the lighting point state. So what was it complaining about? That actually looks right, doesn't it? Oh. This appears to be the problem. So can we carry a light around with us if we do this? Yes, we can. That might be good for the time being, since we don't really have our lighting solid. That's probably better, right? Yeah. This just, now we're just a hopping light cube. What's the problem? It's fine. All right, so let's talk about the camera now that now we've got a marker for our entity and I can carry the light around with me. So a couple things we want to do. First of all, we never want to see a lighting edge. So like that crap up there should never happen. We want to set the fog value, like we want to have some notion of where the fogging should happen and where alpha fading should happen for upper floors and crap like that. And did that just hop through? It hopped up on top? No, it hopped through. So I'm allowed to actually hop to a traversable that is that far away? Why is that? So I can't hop through double walls, but I can hop through single walls. I guess that's the search region for the traversable. Is just that far away. Seems ill-advised, to say the least. Just out of curiosity, why did we do that? I'm just curious. I have no idea why we did it that way. We'll have to look. So yeah, I just feel like we shouldn't be able to hop through those. And I'm not sure why we can. I assume it's because of the hop distance here is just too much. And should be much less than it is. So there's one that actually works more properly, right? I don't know how far apart the tiles actually are. Like I don't know what we actually set our scale to in that case. But now that's at least correct, and it can't get through walls. All right, sorry about that. Just noticed that. I didn't know really what was going on there, so I figured we might as well take care of that issue. All right, so yeah, again, back to the camera thing. So there's a couple things that I would like to do here. One is that I would like the camera to behave in a number of ways that it's not behaving now. So first of all, like the way the debug camera works right now, you can kind of see that the debug camera is actually just a displacement off of whatever the simulation region center is, which means that as I hop from room to room, it actually shifts the camera. I don't actually want that to be true. If I switch into debug camera mode, I would like the camera to just stay exactly where it is, right? And if I want to move to a new location, I will tell you, but I don't really want that to be happening asynchronously of my commands just based on, you know, the movement of it in some separate sense. So I want to be able to represent a debug location and a regular location, both. And so that should probably happen. I'd also like to make it so that the movement of the camera is always guaranteed to be seamless. So the fact that this right now, this part here can happen at all is annoying. And I think it's because we don't map the camera into world positions and back. But we should, right? So like that's just bad. And we don't really want that to happen. Finally, we want there to be a way that says, look, find out where you have to be to view this room. Like right now we've got some kind of crappy like thing in there that I don't know, is like using some kind of heuristic to figure out how far back the camera should be. And I don't want that to happen. I want to basically say, look, this is the region that you should be able to view. You get some exposure control in there. This is the region that you should be able to view, so I want to be able to always guarantee that the entire room that I asked for will be in there. And I guess the thing that we didn't, I think we basically said, look, some rooms are going to be big and they're going to scroll. So I think that's why we did it this way. But what that means is the camera should also, if we're in a room that we have to scroll to view, that should be handled, right? So the camera should gradually scroll up if you're in this region to show you the part that you were in, and it should gradually scroll down in this case to show you the part that you're in now, and left to right or whatever. So larger rooms should scroll, and we don't have any of that in there now. So there's a ton of things that we can improve about the camera, and that's what we should probably start on. The main thing I'll start on now is just no more hitching. So like no more of that hitching nonsense. By the way, what happens if I just make the world dark? Just curious. That's pretty cool. All right. So let's fix this camera. Let's find out what the heck is going on with our camera. And let's try to do something that's not so horrible. So first things first, how are we storing the camera and why? And what kind of crap did we pull in here that's making it lousy? So we've got this notion of the game camera, and it's set up in here. It's saying, here's the entity that I'm looking for. Here's where I am. It's got the simulation center, the offset Z, target P, all this stuff, right, in special. So the first thing I want to know is why, like, what's all this garbage? Why are these things, why do we even have an offset Z, right? Like, why is that even there? Why aren't we just interpolating our world positions? And like, why are we storing the simulation center? Why is any of that stuff happening, right? And I assume that the problem that we're having, the basic problem that we're having, is we don't really know where the simulation center should be without knowing what the entity is, in a sense, right? And without knowing what room we're supposed to be highlighting, right? So I guess the reason we have to store that simulation center is because that has to move around, right? Like we have to be able to go like, okay, here's where the simulation center is going to be, and here's where the P is, and whatever. And so we kind of want to go into this with a little bit of trepidation, but generally speaking, you can see it's not set up too stupidly. It seems okay, right? It doesn't seem totally busted. And because this P and the simulation center, because these things are themselves absolute world positions, I'm not sure why we're getting that jerkiness. So I'd like to know, if I can, I would like to know more about why we're being pulled around that way. One of the reasons we may be in some nastiness is just because we, at the moment, don't have any... we don't have a real interpolator. Like, our interpolator's kind of crap. You can see this to-do right here is telling you exactly that. But I'm not sure why we're getting such... Like, we're still getting pretty unusual results. There's like a discontinuity that probably shouldn't be there, even with the fact that our camera movement's not good. So if we go in here and say, all right, let's find out what the camera entity movement is. Let's find out how and why we're screwing things up. So it is mandatory that the camera center be the sim reader center for this code to work properly, because it cannot add the offset from the sim center to the camera as displacement, or will fail when moving between rooms at the changeover point. Okay. Why would that be, given the fact that we're the ones doing the changeover? Like, we're the people who set the simulation center differently, right? Like, we do that. So, maybe this is a case of us just kind of being dumb, because the simulation region itself should always be the simulation center. And if we're going to reset the simulation center, that should only happen after we've done all of the camera computations anyway. When we go to call this, we don't do anything else after that. So I don't know that I mean, that happens. That's the last thing you do, and mandatorily so. So I'm not really sure. I also don't know why this wouldn't just have the camera be an entity in the world who it updates itself as something that happens as the last thing it wants to do. But all right, so there's a lot of stuff that I'm not sure is on the up and up here. We're going to start by assuming that it's okay to do this at the end. And what I'm going to say there is, look, we know where the simulation center is, and the simulation center always came from the camera to begin with, right? Like when we go here to set the simulation center, inside like begin sim or whatever, right? So inside that, we specifically say that, you know, this is where we want to start things off, right? And so we know that right up until here, you're always using that center anyway. So I'm not even sure why it thinks this is true. Because who cares what that simulation center was? As long as you just always call map into chunk space for whatever the current region is, who cares what you set this to and when? Like, as long as you set it at the end of the routine and don't use it for anything, why would we care? And like even this looks just wrong. Like why would we, yeah. So I'm just gonna say I don't believe this. And you know, I don't know that's what should have been happening in the first place. So looking at this stuff, this pre-pass we can do more work on later. This isn't really the problem here. This is just for identifying special camera locations or things like that. That you know, whatever. We can talk about that some other time, because that's not the problem here. We're assuming that we're just not doing any special camera. So if we're in a room, you can see us saying, look, the simulation center should be the center of the room, because that's how we kind of want to define this game, meaning we're simulating stuff around room boundaries. So that's fine. And if we look at stuff like the target P and the target offset and all that crap, I mean, that seems fine for now. We know this code doesn't matter for the moment. And so when we go here and we say, all right, the candidate space is mapped into chunk space, this thing. The target P is mapped into chunk space, this thing. And the target offset's going to be this. Then, you know, the thing that strikes me as busted is this is now dependent on this change. And so it's going to be wrong for one frame. But why didn't we just do it over here? You know what I mean? So this just seems dumb. Right? It just doesn't add up. Like, it seems like, I don't know if we were just like, if we just got confused when we wrote it originally, or if we like, maybe we weren't really thinking about it right, or maybe it was because we were like coming at it from the wrong way. We like had it working one way, and you know, as we changed it, it came the other way. But you know, this should just be based around the simulation center. I mean, that's what it should be. Because the camera is just another thing that should get mapped into that space. And we shouldn't have to do this at all. In other words, this should be the region origin, if anything else, right? It should be this. Right? It should not matter what the camera simulation center thinks it is. These things are things that are happening relative to the sim space anyway, so just do them in that space, right? And then when you map them in, you know, off you go. And that way we could also map this more at the outset, and things would probably be better there too. But that's sort of a separate issue, right? So I'm not sure why we wanted to use the simulation center as something. I can't say exactly why that would have caused any bugs per se, but just doesn't seem like a good idea, because everything in this game should be based around the simulation region always. And the fact that the camera stores what the next frame simulation center would be should not change the fact that everything should always be happening in sim space. Because otherwise you got two different spaces potentially, and that just further adds to the confusion, right? And there's no point to it. So I would say like we would rather do this, for sure. Now again, I'm just gonna double check that that runs okay because I think it should. I still don't know where our bug was coming from though. Like we were having sort of a strange, like hiccup bug there, and I don't know where that's coming from. So like do you see it? Do you see that weird like the height maybe is what changes discontinuously? And so it's like the offset Z's are happening weirdly, and I guess that makes sense too in a way because the camera's offset Z has to be based. We have to be interpolating the position. So the offset Z is not what you want. This camera offset Z should never really be there. And the camera target P and target P, those should actually just have the Z in them directly, right? I mean, that's probably how we should have been doing it, but, you know, I guess we weren't, so oops. But looking at how that's going, you know, like I said, why is this even a thing? You know, why aren't we just saying, well, the target P should include whatever the offset Z is, and you should just interpolate to it, right? I mean, why isn't it just this? Because this is a position. It's saying, look, I want to go from here to here, and that's what I'm doing. When we compute where we would like it to go, sure, talking in terms of an offset Z may be something we want to do because it just helps us construct the final target. But why would we have that be something that's maintained separately for no apparent reason? And I don't know why, right? Like the delta should just work, you know, in this case. And we shouldn't have to worry about all these weird like offset Z nonsenses because who cares, right? So this should not be a thing. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say other than it shouldn't be a thing. Yeah, so in terms of get camera rectangle at target, in this case, what we'd like to do is say, in terms of the Z here, we want to just know, we want to know for the point that we're actually simulating around, right? So for get camera rectangle at target, even this world camera rect just isn't very smart because again, it's not a rectangle, it's a frustum now. You know what I mean? And so this is kind of just not right. Yeah, so a lot of that stuff is kind of stupid, and I'm not sure really how else to describe it other than that. Let's look at how these things are actually written in here. And you know, I'm gonna hack this in a second. Or right now. I'm just gonna say like, all right, suppose it's 8 units away. Who cares? I don't care right now. But let's look through that code a little bit more cleanly and see what happened. What's the problem here? Guess our particle systems were unhappy about that. So now what I want to see is like, look, when we're interpolating now, I expect this to be always correct. So I want to know why we're getting an offset there, because if we're just interpolating only to, you know, just those two positions, so we're just interpolating a P to another, you know, P to P, I want to find out where our discontinuity is coming from. why the frame boundary is causing it. Because I should be able now, if I'm always using the simulation origin, I should now always be able to unpack the camera's location relative to that simulation boundary. And that should give me what I want, right? In other words, this is always in an absolute space now. So it shouldn't be able to be wrong even across a frame boundary. And so we need to go find out why it is. Like what's going on there that would be incorrect. Does that make sense? So let's go see how we're unpacking that. So in update and render worlds, when do I actually create the... So there's my zerotations. So yeah, so this actually is fine, right? Because it's going to be, this is where things are going to be unpacked relative to as well. So this should still work. And so I think like, yeah, like the reason that we had been doing it the other way is I think we were maybe thinking something else was causing frame hiccups, but it wasn't that. But that is actually what the problem is, you know? And so I feel like we need to find out what the real cause was, and I think we were just papering over it by assuming that for some reason you couldn't do it in absolute space. But you totally can. Like that should just work, right? Because the relative subtractions should still produce the same result. That's my story and I'm sticking to it, right? Because this simulation center is now, that's going to be 0, 0, 0. And so when we packed the camera into this origin, it's just about where we unpacked it before. And when we unpacked it, we need to make sure we always unpack like the camera, what is it called? The simulation center? Yeah, as long as we always map everything relative to the origin of the simulation region, that should always be correct. And then as long as we set the simulation center correct, like what is delta from sim? Yeah, that's fine. So when we begin the simulation, when do we set this? Yeah, so we set the simulation center here, so everything will be unpacked relative to that, which is what we want, right? That's good. So I'm not sure where else we could have introduced a bad thing there. We look at the focal length, we look at the camera Z. It's just whatever we got out of that column, right? With the OT, what the heck is camera offset? Okay, so that'll be 0. So that could just be removed. So that's better. World mode camera dolly should be set to 0 always unless we're doing debugging. So this should also just be 0. And in fact always is. So I'm not really sure why we had that either. So this is complete nonsense and probably explains why we were getting the bugs before. So if you look at this, we were saying here's the rotation of the camera, right? But that means that we're actually taking where we said the camera was and rotating it to line up with the pitch, right? But we don't want to do that, right? What we want to do is make sure that we use that pitch to figure out where we wanted the camera to be, and then that just should get rolled into the delta, right? Because otherwise we've got interpolation. Yeah, like this is just dumb. So let me say a little bit about this first, because like when we were hacking this together, we probably didn't go over it very well. When you're doing animation interpolation, generally speaking, you want to make sure that you actually interpolate things in the way that they really exist. So parametric constructions that are of the kind we had here, where we're like, oh, let's take a location and then back up from it and bend that around, and then here's where the thing is. Interpolating in that parameter space is almost never a good idea. And the reason it isn't is because the viewer usually expects things to be smooth in the absolute parameter space, like outside of it. Because they're thinking of this as like a camera moving through space. They don't want it to be smooth in the parameter system of the cameras. That doesn't make any sense. So then you end up constantly fighting that. So this is bad and should not have happened. And so we want this stuff to actually be something that's set up more in the camera side of things, you know, not here. So the debug camera we'll address in a second, because that's again a sort of a separate issue. But let me just take a look at what's going on here now. So now I don't think we'll get any hiccups at all, right? And you can see that we're not, because now we're interpolating frame to frame, and look at how nice and clean that is. So that's how we should have been doing it before, but I don't know, I just had like, you know, lard head that day or whatever. And so it was screwed up. So what we want to do now is in that camera code, we want to go add that lean in there. And when I say lean, I mean David Lean, the director who made Lawrence of Arabia. We want to go in there and have that lean be part of the camera offset so that it correctly figures out where the actual camera would be in world space based on how we want the camera tilted, right? And so that's, you know, that's what we actually want to do here. So, you know, off we go. So in here, we get the camera Z out. What we want to do is send that camera Z when we're actually doing the, like, where's the camera, right? We want to pass that in so that when we do update the camera in here, it knows, like, you know, what that vector would have been. So then when we do the displacement, we just say, oh, if that's what you like to look down, if that's how you're looking down, then what we'll do is we'll set the location to be, you know, when we're creating one of these things here, where we ask for where the target is going to be, you know, we'll say, well, the target P is whatever it should have been offset, you know, for wise. We'll just multiply by that vector so that now we're actually going to move you back along the tilted vector so that you still look down on it. But again, all of that gets rolled into the desired target location, so we're not feeding forward a bunch of hard to interpolate values. So now we can still look at the center, but we notice how clean the interpolation is, no bugs. And there's none of this garbage to do up at the top or garbage note from me saying that there is some nonsense about having to have them line up frame by frame, right? So now the interpolation is exactly perfect and we never have any of that. Our interpolator still sucks, don't get me wrong. It's a weird exponential frame-based interpolator, which is terrible. So we want to fix that, but at least now there's no jarring things. It's buttery smooth, and we got it buttery smooth by removing code, right? Because I had extra code in there that was stupid, and adding stupid code doesn't make it better. It makes it worse. Just ask the C++ Standard Committee. They've been doing it for 30 years. So what we want to do now is we want to go fix the projection part of this, because like I said, we now need to have a good way of figuring out where that lighting region is. I won't do that now because that's a good thing to start on next week. Next stream. But that's what we wanted to fix there. So that's so much better. And I apologize for not just typing that in the first place, but off we go. So I'll go to a brief Q&A now and take any questions, and then we'll wrap it up for today. JMC516, have you ever found yourself angry with something in the game, maybe the progress of a certain part? If so, how do you get past it? I usually don't look at it that way. I'm always angry with the state of my code, and that is just what makes me keep trying to make things better. I guess if you always think all the code is terrible, then that does help in a sense, because it means that you don't necessarily have any more motivation to do one part than any other part, so you're free to make other decisions, because you're always like, well, everything in this game could use work, so if this seems like the most high priority thing, I'll just go do it because it's as valid to work on as anything else. Are you planning to switch up the interpolation with a smooth damp function? I would say that I don't super care for the jargon. Smooth step, smooth damp, things like this. I don't know why we have those names. I worked in animation for, code for 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And I just prefer to be more specific about it, right? So what I will be switching the camera to is either second order or third order interpolator that uses the velocity of the camera at the current time as a constraint. That is what I will be switching it to. Do you ever feel like everything needs to work to the point it's demotivating, you're not even sure, or everything needs work to the point where it's demotivating, you're not even sure where to start? Yes and no. So here's what I would say. In a perfect world where I just had funding to do whatever I wanted all the time and that things were magical, it never would demotivate me because I always want to work on all of it. So I just work on it and I wouldn't mind. So really the part that's demotivating is realizing that you will never have enough time to do stuff before it has to go out the door, or you just become bankrupt and poor and whatever. And so if I worked in a research lab, I would never be demotivated, like ever, because I always want to work on it. But in the real world, yes, it can be demotivating because you're just like, I'm never gonna get all this done, and so that's unfortunate, right? But that's just true for everything. I mean, no matter what you do, it's always true that you could have done more. Even if you use a license engine and plugins and used as much off-the-shelf stuff as you could, whatever the part is that you're making, you could have done more, right? It's almost never... It's only if you have a very limited idea of the possibilities that you'd ever be like, well, that's perfect, right? Like, so it's just something you have to live with, it's unfortunate, but it's also, in some sense, you could look at it in a positive light in that, hey, it means that as long as we still have some market for shipping this stuff, there will always be work to do because there's always things you could have improved on in your previous time you did it. So you never have to think about it as like, well, I mean, we're just done now. Right? Gary Johansson. So we've been debating the merits of using a garbage collected language like Go in a network situation where you have absolutely no prediction of what data loads will be coming in. Do you think a language like Go would be a good choice? I feel like you've answered a question like this, but I honestly don't remember your response. I guess what I would say is garbage collection doesn't really ever seem to solve problems for me that I care about. Because the way I would state it is that garbage collection is not solving memory allocation in any way that anything else doesn't solve it, right? It's just one way of managing your memory. And so if the answer is that garbage collection is the optimal way to manage the memory, then I could have written something that effectively did that, right? And so at that point, it's like, well, is using Go better than doing that? Sure, probably. I mean, I trust that they probably wrote a good garbage collector for whatever they were doing, and so that seems reasonable. But identifying an actual real-world situation where garbage collection was the most efficient way to manage the memory, I can't really even think of one. I've certainly never seen one. And usually what garbage collection is an excuse for you to not figure out what the optimal way to manage the memory was. And so a lot of times when you talk about garbage collection, what you're really talking about is, do I want to save programming time not worrying about memory management? That's very different than saying I wanted to write the proper program here. And so it's just worth understanding what you're actually doing. So I would say, if you're choosing Go, in a sense what you're saying is, I am okay with this code performing worse than it should in exchange for me not doing some certain work. And that's very different from saying it was a good technical decision. It may be a good managerial decision, but garbage collection is almost never a good technical decision because you could have probably done a much better job if you thought about how the memory should work. Right? So I would really emphasize splitting those two things apart because that's usually where the arguments start. If someone's arguing that garbage collection was actually the best way to manage the memory, they're probably wrong. It almost never is. Maybe there's a circumstance where it is literally indistinguishable from what you would have done optimally, but that's almost never true. So really the only argument made for garbage collection is managerial. Here are some reasons. The programmers on this project aren't good enough to deal with memory. Totally valid managerial decision. If they aren't, use a garbage collector. It might work, right? They might still screw it up because garbage collectors can't fix things where you leave references around that it doesn't know you're done with, right? So you can still screw up, but, you know, that's a totally reasonable managerial decision. The programmers on this project aren't good enough. 2, the amount of analysis and work we'll have to do to get the memory management correct isn't going to be worth it on this project because we don't have the time, or we don't have the resources, or we'd rather do something else, or our competition is all terrible anyway, so we will still be faster than them even if we don't do a very good job, right? All of those are also valid managerial decisions. So, you know, just understand what you're arguing about. And if you're arguing about some of those things, I want to save my team time. I don't think the team's good enough. We've had a lot of bugs like this in the past, so we just assume we can't really handle it properly. Blah, 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 blah. All valid managerial decisions, valid arguments. Garbage collection is good at managing memory here. Probably not a valid argument. Like, probably just not. Is it better to work on a fun task or a task that is more important if you have limited time? That's a tough decision because one of the things about fun tasks is you may get them done quicker, or you may do a higher quality of work on them. So I feel like that's a really tough thing to answer. Obviously, a more important task is more important to do, so you should probably do it instead of the fun task. But if you're going to be doing lousy work or you're procrastinating all the time and the more important task isn't getting done, maybe switching to the fun task for a little while is a good idea. And no, we don't. This is a procedural game, so there's no scripting language in it. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Yeah, again, on the garbage collection front, I would really encourage people to think to make sure they know what they're arguing about when they argue about things like that. And you know, garbage collection just it's really usually not worth arguing about also because it's just like I think the answers are very clear, right? Garbage collection is never the best code, pretty much ever. I don't think I've ever seen a situation where garbage collection is going to be the most efficient way to run that code, right? And so as long as we agree on that, then we're really just talking about managerial decisions, and those are very fuzzy. So I don't know that there's that much arguing you can really do. Like, you know, sometimes it's clear cut. These programmers are beginners. They don't even know what a pointer is. Like, use garbage collection. Come on. Like, they're going to screw it up. It's fine. But if you have a bunch of experts and they really know what they're doing, should we be using garbage collection? I don't know. How complicated is the code? Is it editing based? How much realistic flexibility is there in how much the asset space is, and so on and so forth? You know, do we have to get this done extremely quickly? Maybe we just don't want to think about it, and performance isn't the issue. You know, and hopefully we can all make a reasonable decision there. I mean, we know what it is. It's not like it's weird what garbage collection does. It's very obvious what it does and how it does it. So, you know, and so really the only thing I would encourage people to say is like, let's make sure we get the technicals down first. Garbage collection isn't good. It's a lousy way to manage memory in terms of if you're trying to get optimal performance. Accept that fact, and if we can accept the fact that that's true, and move on to talking about whether using a lousy memory manager is in fact better than doing it ourselves, is a separate discussion, and you can say yes to that. You can say yes, right? All the code you will ever write in your whole life will probably not be optimal, except very small, tiny, maybe little bits, you know? And so it's okay to say we're going to do something non-optimal here, and we understand that, but it's the right decision. And so that's what, but you want to get that, right? Don't confuse making a trade-off with saying that you're doing the right thing in some abstract sense, because that's not what's going on. You're making a trade-off. You're saying, let's have worse performance in exchange for something. And as long as you know what that something is and you've justified it well, that's a totally reasonable decision. But you don't want to argue as if you didn't make a trade-off, because you did, right? So, all right. What did we change? What did I change? It says save changes. What were the changes? Tell me what the changes are? No, don't change them, I guess. I don't even know what the changes were. Heaven forfend. I didn't mean to make any changes. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. It felt good to fix that camera bug. It was driving me nuts. And hey, we simplified that code. You notice the theme of late is just simplifying code now. And everything gets better. Why is that the case? It's the case because, again, with exploratory architecture, we're saying we don't know exactly how things should work. There's a lot of slop there. And as things build up and change and mutate, there's garbage code that's in there and bad ways of doing things that naturally kind of happened as we brought systems up together. But once we're now at a place now where we're like, yeah, this engine is pretty reasonable and it's got most of the things we need, now we can see those areas where things come together and it becomes obvious how they can be made much simpler and work much cleaner. And so we're just going in there and cleaning those out, right? And cleaning those out. It's like polishing the artwork, right? You know, you get this sort of rough plaster cast of this thing and you look it off and it's all rough and gross. And now we're just going in there and like, you know, getting it all smooth. It's like, oh, yeah, that's actually quite beautiful. Like now that we get to it, right? And so you'll see that theme that will continue to play out over the next few months as we bring the actual game into a game state, like a actual, like this is a game. You'll see me doing that over and over where like things that were complicated and weird before, now that's clear how they work, they just get nicely polished over and become a very simple thing. You saw it with the asset system, now you're seeing it with the camera code, and that will continue to be true. The renderer kind of went through that. It'll go through one more time. Hopefully the lighting happens that way too, but the lighting's the worst part, so that'll be the harder one. But you know, it's good to see, right? That's a good sign. That's not a sign you screwed up. That's a sign you did your job. You did the right thing. And you're finally getting to the correct architecture that now you could say, hey, we figured it out. We got it now. All right, so there'll be more surprise streams coming. I can't say when because then they wouldn't be surprises. So, you know, keep a check on the live stream page here, and I'll be updating the schedule as it goes. Also, there's also the Twitter. You can always check on the Handmade Hero Twitter. It's got a feed that goes on, you know what I'm saying? This thing. It always says when we're live and all that stuff, so you can always get on there if you want to too. All right, that's it for today. Remember, if you want to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with a source code, so if you want to play around with it, you can just hit that big green button. You can either, it's got a GitHub thing on there and it's got a source code download. The GitHub's kind of unsupported, but we haven't had any problems with it yet, so it seems like it's pretty good for people who like to use that as an alternate way of getting the source. So go ahead and check that out, and that's about it. Till next stream, have fun programming, everyone, and I'll see you on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.